Eleanor had been raised on tales of conquest and fire, of kings and queens who sat upon the Iron Throne in all their splendor only to watch their glory crumble beneath the crushing weight of crowns. She was a child when the stories first found her ears, clutched at her mother's skirts in the drafty corridors of Dragonstone, eyes wide with a mix of wonder and dread. In that half-lit hallway, torchlight dancing against ancient stone, her mother's voice would echo, "Power does not come without price." There was a tremor there, buried in the quiet hush of her tone, a reverence or perhaps fear of something far greater than any mortal. Years later, Eleanor would recall those moments when she stepped foot into the Red Keep and finally caught sight of the throne that had haunted her dreams. The seat of swords loomed at the center of the throne room, jagged edges lit by the torches, shards of steel reflecting fire. It was the seat of absolute authority, the seat on which the fate of kingdoms turned. That day, she could have sworn she felt it breathe. She had arrived as a guest under the banner of truce, though if there had been any illusions of safety, they were quickly dispelled by the swirling tension that seemed to knot the atmosphere of King's Landing itself. Walking through the city gates had been like walking into the belly of some great beast. Every alley and courtyard was alive with murmured rumors, another lord gone mad, another betrayal, another execution. She sensed a subtle hum beneath it all, like dark magic that seeped through the mortar of the city walls and spread unseen to every corner. When she finally laid eyes upon the Iron Throne, she understood. It was the source, the bleeding heart of all the realm's sorrows, a pulse of cold steel that corrupted the blood of whoever dared to claim it. She was no fool. She knew the legends, how the throne was forged from the swords of the defeated by Aegon Targaryen's dragonfire. Many spoke of it as a symbol, a cautionary reminder that power was not easily won nor lightly kept. But there were older, darker whispers, old wives' tales about the throne being alive in its own way, bound by the souls or the agonies of those who died to create it. Most people in the Seven Kingdoms dismissed such talk as superstition. Eleanor was never so sure. Even from 20 paces away, she felt it draw her in, the prickle on the back of her neck that made her stomach churn. The relic's presence weighed on her, like invisible chains hooking into her chest, tugging her closer. It was a hunger. She was determined never to feed that hunger. She recalled her mother's teachings, how one must cling to humility when the world offered up crowns. Power is easy to come by, her mother had warned. But peace? Peace requires more than swords or coin. Peace demands honesty and sacrifice. From her earliest days, she was taught how to read people's hearts, not just their words. She learned to see the hope in their eyes and the doubt in their stance, to listen to that quiet, fragile music of the spirit that told her everything about a person's true motivations. And so, in that throne room, she saw the handful of courtiers who had gathered to watch King Aeron's daily audience. Their faces were set in rigid masks of deference, but beneath the surface she saw their fear. She saw how their eyes flicked from the king to the throne, how the name Aeron Targaryen was whispered with a mixture of awe and dread, but never respect. He was merely the occupant of that seat, a puppet for a darker power. Or so Eleanor believed. King Aeron had once been a kind and thoughtful man. She had met him as a young girl, back when his eyes were bright with idealism and he dreamed of forging a peaceful realm. Back then he had laughed easily, gentleness shining from his every gesture. But now, seated on that twisted mass of steel, his face was drawn and hollow, his eyes two hard chips of obsidian. He hardly moved. He hardly spoke. It was said that he spent many hours alone, locked in the throne room with the torches extinguished, whispering to the Iron Throne. People gossiped that they heard him cackling with madness, or sobbing like a child, or making bargains with something unseen. But only the king and the throne truly knew what transpired in those hours. Eleanor approached carefully that day, mindful of her posture, every step measured. She bowed at the appropriate distance and offered the customary words of reverence, but her tone was soft and her voice devoid of the trembling fear that others might have expected. Immediately, King Aeron's gaze flicked toward her, lingering. She felt it like a cold wind against her cheeks. The courtiers shifted in discomfort at her audacity, or perhaps at her lack of it. She was not here to flatter him. She was here on behalf of her people, her mother's old domain. She was here because the rumors had grown too dire to ignore, and the realm teetered on the brink of something catastrophic. War was brewing again. He asked her why she had come. His voice rasped, as though some dryness of spirit had settled permanently in his throat. She told him of the farmland that was dying in the Crownlands, of the ravaged villages down by the coasts that once shipped their goods to King's Landing but now lay abandoned. She spoke of the hungry peasants, forced to scavenge in the forests like animals, of the highways once safe under royal patrols but now ruled by brigands. And as she spoke, she saw him blink slowly as if returning from some distant place. For a moment there was a flicker in his gaze that resembled the man she once knew. Then he glanced aside at the imposing silhouette of the Iron Throne and his lips tightened. When he looked back at her, any trace of warmth was gone. He gave her an order so callous and unfeeling that it made her bite her tongue in anger. He told her the peasants should leave if they could not survive. Let them depart the crownlands, let them beg for scraps in foreign cities or find some place to die that was not his responsibility. In that moment, Eleanor felt a spark of rage stir in her belly. This was not the man she remembered. This was a shell filled with poison. Yet she forced herself to remain calm, to hold her composure in front of the watchful eyes of the court. The king turned his face away from her, dismissing her pleas like someone brushing aside a stray hair. But in that instant she saw it clearly, the throne had its hooks in him. She bowed again, though this time with more stiffness. A quiet vow formed in her heart that she would help free him from the throne's grasp if possible, and if not, she would protect her people from the plague that he had become. As she left the throne room, she noticed a faint, acrid smell like scorched metal in the back of her nostrils. She couldn't say if it was merely the stench of old, rusted steel or something else, something intangible emanating from that artifact of power. Either way, she knew that the city's heart was rotting from the inside out. Her steps echoed in the corridors, a hollow resonance against the cold stone. Every guard post she passed seemed manned by soldiers who wore identical grimaces, eyes haunted by the knowledge that something was deeply wrong with their king. She also noticed the presence of silent watchers in black cloaks who seemed always to linger at corners or half-hidden doorways. They would appear to be nothing more than servants, yet she felt their eyes on her. Something told her these watchers served not the king, but the throne or whatever presence had wound its way into the monarchy. Out in the yard, she found her mare stabled among the royal horses. She thought to leave the Red Keep that very morning, but something tugged at her curiosity. The memory of King Aaron's eyes lingered in her mind. The flicker of recognition, the momentary guilt, the shadow that moved across his face when she spoke of the peasants. She could not simply abandon him. Nor could she turn a blind eye to the cruelty that festered in the halls of power. Instead, she found lodging for herself among friends of her mother's who remained in King's Landing. Lady Sephra welcomed Eleanor into her modest estate near the Street of Silk. It was a cramped property, overshadowed by more towering structures, but it was safe enough, and it provided Eleanor with a base from which she could watch the city more closely. Over the following days, Eleanor roamed the markets and the narrow labyrinths of King's Landing. She passed taverns where she overheard travelers muttering dark tidings from the north, speak of lords turning on each other, and rumors of the king's new decrees that made little sense. One man claimed King Aaron had levied a tax on singing, punishing any bard who performed in public without paying a fee first. Another woman said that the king held nightly rituals in the throne room, chanting phrases in an unknown tongue. Though many of these stories were likely exaggerations, Eleanor sensed enough truth in them to confirm that something sinister was at work. People were afraid, and fear bred chaos. She spent her time quietly gathering knowledge. She learned which lords had grown disenchanted with King Aaron's rule and who might be open to forging alliances to contain his madness. She discovered that the king's small council was fracturing, some members fleeing, others meeting secret ends. Bodies turned up in the harbor, rumored to be the result of clandestine murders, and the hush that followed made it clear no justice would be served. The city was slowly sinking into an undercurrent of violence. Through all of it, the Iron Throne loomed in Eleanor's mind, an unspoken force that seemed to pulse like a malignant heart, controlling the city's destiny. Every fresh atrocity or bizarre decree traced back to the king, and behind the king, that seat of swords. On a gray afternoon, the sky heavy with the threat of rain, Eleanor went to the Grand September in a final effort to pray for guidance. She had not been particularly devout in her youth, but despair often drives mortals to seek the divine. Inside, the flickering candles illuminated the statues of the seven, each visage carved in marble to represent aspects of life and virtue. The marble was cold, and the faint smell of incense hung in the air. Eleanor knelt before the statue of the mother, her mind drifting to her own mother's voice. She whispered a prayer for clarity, for wisdom, for a path to save Aaron, if that was even still possible, and to protect the helpless caught in the throes of his tyranny. She felt no miraculous clarity descend upon her. Instead, she found the white-haired Septa who oversaw the Grand September approach her quietly. The Septa's eyes were kind, yet there was something earnest, almost urgent, in her expression. She guided Eleanor aside, explaining in hushed tones that she had heard rumors of a hidden text in the vaults beneath the September, a manuscript so old it predated the Targaryen conquest, perhaps older still, rumored to speak of a doom that would befall those who sat upon a throne forged in blood. The Septa offered no guarantees it was more than a myth, but the possibility alone sparked hope in Eleanor. Could there be knowledge hidden away that might explain the Iron Throne's hold on those who ruled? Could it hold the key to breaking the throne's power? That night, under the cover of darkness, Eleanor returned to the Grand September, meeting the Septa in secret. Together, they descended into the catacombs beneath the holy structure, passing through winding corridors lined with dusty tomes and ancient scrolls. Torchlight revealed cobwebs that draped the corners like funeral veils, and the air felt cold and damp. Finally, in a small alcove behind what looked like a collapsed wall, the Septa pointed to a half-broken chest. Inside, Eleanor found a single bundle of parchment, bound by thick leather cords, the writing on its surface faint and nearly illegible. She opened it with trembling hands. What she read seemed half delirious with age, a mixture of archaic High Valyrian and some older script she did not recognize. Yet she made out phrases that spoke of a cursed seat, a seat built not merely from swords but from the souls of the slain. There was mention of an iron soul, an entity that seeped into the mind of the one who sat upon this seat, feeding on ambition and fear until it drove them to madness. One passage claimed that the only way to end the cycle of corruption was to break the seed itself, to melt it down entirely, though the method to do so seemed lost or destroyed. These references were fragmentary at best, but the essence was clear: the throne was no mere symbol. It was alive in its own twisted way, and each king who claimed it had, in essence, signed a pact with it. No wonder King Aeron had changed so drastically. Her pulse pounded as she carefully rolled the manuscript back up and tucked it into her cloak, thanking the Septa with quiet earnestness. Her mind raced. If this was true, and it felt true, then the realm was under the thrall of an artifact, not just a mere man. How many rulers had perished on those jagged blades? How many spines had been sliced open by the seat's cruel edges? Her mother's warnings about the cost of power echoed with renewed intensity. Eleanor knew she had to act, but how? The text had implied a solution: the total destruction of the Iron Throne. That seemed an impossible feat even if the king could be persuaded, which seemed unlikely. The throne was a symbol for the entire realm, and every noble house had staked some portion of its pride upon that legacy. To destroy it would be to upend centuries of tradition and might provoke a civil war bigger than any she could imagine. Yet what alternative was there? To do nothing would be to let the madness fester and spread. She left the catacombs with a fierce resolve in her heart, the old parchment clutched protectively beneath her cloak. She made her way through the winding streets, the flickering light of guttering torches guiding her back to Lady Sephra's estate. She felt the eyes of those black-cloaked watchers upon her once more, but when she looked behind her, she saw nothing except shadows. She rushed inside, barricading the door to her small chamber and lighting a single candle at her desk. She read the manuscript again and again, deciphering what she could, taking notes on scraps of paper. A heavy knock at the door startled her sometime before dawn. It was Lady Sephra warning her that the king's men had come searching. They claimed to be investigating sedition, rumors of traitors in the city conspiring to undermine the sanctity of the crown. Swiftly, Eleanor hid the ancient parchment in the hollow of a bedpost. She composed herself. If the king's men found her, she would have to be cautious. But if they arrested her, no one would remain to investigate the throne's secret. She had to keep her head about her. When she descended to the foyer, she found 3 royal guards armed to the teeth, their expressions as cold as the steel they carried. Their leader, a stern-faced captain, demanded to question her about her recent whereabouts, claiming they had evidence she was consorting with enemies of the crown. She answered calmly, weaving half-truths about her visits to the markets and the sept, and insisting that her loyalties had never wavered. Lady Sephra stood by her side, offering support. When they threatened to search every room of the estate, Lady Sephra gently reminded them that by the king's own decree, private property was still protected unless they had direct royal orders. The men hesitated. Their eyes flicked with suspicion, but they lacked the authority to forcibly search a noble's home without cause. Eventually, they departed, but not without a final warning that they would be back. Eleanor trembled once the door closed, though not merely from fear, but from the raw adrenaline coursing through her veins. She realized that time was not on her side. Any day now, Aeron's madness could worsen, or the Watchers could uncover her secret. She needed allies, powerful ones. Her mother's old friend, Lord Demian Caraway, was rumored to be in the city. He commanded great respect among the older noble houses, having served the previous king loyally, and he was known to oppose King Aaron's most erratic policies. If she could convince him of the Iron Throne's true nature, maybe they could form a coalition strong enough to enact a plan. That plan, if it followed the logic of the old parchment, would be to destroy the throne outright. Felt surreal and almost heretical idea. The throne was the seat of legitimacy for every Targaryen king since Aegon the Conqueror. To destroy it would be tantamount to declaring the monarchy itself illegitimate. Yet, as her mind flashed to the memory of Aaron's hollow stare, to the frightened murmur of the peasants, to the rotting farmland, she knew she had little choice. If the realm was to be saved, the artifact had to be broken. Perhaps the monarchy could rebuild around a new seat, one not forged in blood and twisted steel. At dawn's first light, she slipped out the back gate of Lady Sefra's estate and wove her way through the city's less conspicuous routes. She avoided the main avenues, where the king's guards patrolled. She kept to alleyways and narrower streets, where hawkers sold stale bread and half-rotten fruit. Stifling her urge to retch at the stench, she pressed onward until she reached the rundown district where she had heard Lord Carroway was hiding. It was said he'd been forced into secrecy after speaking publicly against the king's cruelty. She found him in a modest tavern, seated at a corner table. The once regal man had seen better days, his silver hair now disheveled, his fine clothing replaced with a simple cloak. His eyes, however, remained as sharp as ever. She approached cautiously, gesturing for a private conversation. He eyed her with wariness but allowed her to sit. Quietly, she explained her suspicions about the Iron Throne, glossing over the details of where she found her information but hinting at ancient texts. She spoke of the throne's power to warp the minds of those who ruled, giving examples of historical kings who had descended into cruelty and madness. By the time she finished, his face had grown grave, but she could see a spark of recognition in his gaze. Lord Carroway admitted that he, too, had wondered if something deeper was at play. He spoke of the nightmares he'd experienced after just standing near the throne. There had been nights when he would wake drenched in sweat, dreaming of screams echoing in a chamber of swords, of shadows dancing in flame. He had dismissed it as the stress of courtly life, but hearing Eleanor's story, he realized there might be a more sinister explanation. When she proposed destroying the throne, he balked. She could see the shock flicker across his features. But after a moment of silent deliberation, he placed a hand on hers and said, "Tell me how I can help." In the days that followed, Eleanor and Lord Carroway worked in secrecy. They recruited a small circle of trusted individuals, knights, a few mages from the distant east, and some lords who had grown weary of King Aaron's reign. Not all believed in the throne's sentience, but enough were willing to consider it, if only because no other explanation made sense for the king's swift descent into madness. They all knew the risk was enormous. If discovered, they would be branded as traitors and executed without trial. Yet the alternative was to watch the kingdom devour itself under the weight of a cursed monarchy. They began to plan. According to the fragments in the ancient manuscript, the curse that bound the throne might be undone if the swords were completely melted. How? Ever, it could not be done by ordinary fire. The text suggested that only dragon fire, or possibly a powerful magic harnessing the forces of the world's raw essence, could break the bond. But the last dragons were long gone, and the realm had not seen true dragon fire in generations. Nor was there a mage in the known world whose power rivaled that of Aegon the Conqueror's beasts. Lord Carroway recalled rumors of a hidden cabal of pyromancers in the city, men and women who dabbled in wildfire, an alchemical substance said to burn hotter than dragon fire. Wildfire was notoriously unstable, capable of consuming entire cities if mishandled. Using it on the throne could be catastrophic if they failed. But it was the best lead they had. Eleanor volunteered to approach the pyromancers in person. She had always possessed a disarming presence, a way of earning trust without words. Lord Carroway would remain behind to coordinate the support of the other conspirators and to monitor any moves by the king's men. Time was crucial, for King Aaron was growing increasingly erratic. Whispers from the Red Keep hinted at him ordering entire families to the dungeons for the slightest perceived slights. The city was on edge, and soon open rebellion might erupt. If that happened, all chance to quietly destroy the throne would be lost amid the bloodshed. Under the cover of a moonless night, Eleanor found the secret lair of the pyromancers. It lay beneath a dilapidated warehouse near the Blackwater Rush. She had been directed to look for an unmarked door beside a broken lantern. After knocking in a peculiar pattern, 2 short taps, a pause, then 3 taps, she was admitted into a narrow corridor lit by sickly green torches. The air smelled acrid, almost like acid, making her eyes water. Hooded figures lurked in the corners, their voices echoing in cryptic whispers. One led her deeper underground, through chambers of twisted experiments and shelves laden with greenish vials. Finally, she was brought before their master, an imposing figure who wore a mask fashioned in the visage of a dragon. She explained her need. The masked master tilted their head, silent for a long moment. Then the master spoke in a low, raspy voice, explaining that wildfire was indeed a potential tool to burn anything, even the metals of the Iron Throne. However, the quantity required would be immense, and the risk of the entire Red Keep going up in flames was undeniable. If they were to proceed, it had to be done with precision. Further, the pyromancers demanded a price, knowledge, gold, and the promise that their order would not be persecuted if Aaron's reign ended. Despite the wildness of the demand, Eleanor agreed. She had no illusions about the morality of dealing with these clandestine alchemists, but desperate times required desperate measures. She returned to Lord Caraway with news of the arrangement. Although he was uneasy about involving the pyromancers, they had no better alternative. Next, they had to figure out how to gain access to the throne room without raising suspicion. Nightly, the king and his retinue guarded the Great Hall. Yet, rumor had it that sometimes King Aaron retired to his chambers for brief intervals, entrusting the throne to minimal guards as though no mortal threat existed. They would have to act during one of those windows. The group began to track the king's routine using spies within the castle staff. They discovered that, every 7th day, the king vanished with a handful of trusted knights, presumably to conduct one of his mysterious rituals, leaving the throne unoccupied for at least an hour. That hour would be their chance. Over the next weeks, they smuggled small barrels of wildfire into the city, disguising them as mundane goods, storing them in safe houses near the Red Keep. Tension was at a boiling point. King Aaron's madness had reached new heights. He ordered the children of several noble houses taken as wards to secure their parents' obedience, threatened the faith with dissolution if they did not declare him chosen by the Seven, and even demanded that the city's blacksmiths craft more swords to be added to the throne, fueling the Twisted Seat's hunger. The people muttered that King Aaron had grown pale and thin, his voice echoing with a strange timbre, and that sometimes they heard him shouting at empty air in the dead of night. Rumors said the throne seemed to hum or whisper, the swords vibrating faintly whenever the king approached. The entire city trembled in dread. At last, the night came. The conspirators gathered in the cramped cellar of an abandoned inn, adjacent to a covered passage that led close to the walls of the Red Keep. Eleanor stood among them, heart-pounding. She wore black leather to blend with the shadows, a dagger at her side. Lord Caraway was there, his face tense, along with 2 knights who had lost loved ones to the king's latest purge, and 4 of the pyromancers carrying carefully sealed barrels. Everyone understood that their chances of survival were slim. If they succeeded, they might still die in the ensuing chaos. But if they failed, the realm would continue its slide into darkness, all for the sake of a cursed seat. They began their approach near midnight, slipping through a disused postern gate known only to a few. Once inside the castle grounds, they skirted the walls, hugging every patch of shadow. The Red Keep's silhouette rose above them, torchlit windows casting an eerie glow on the courtyard. The group paused behind a stack of hay near the stables, waiting for a signal from their lookout, a sympathetic guard who had agreed to distract the king's men if necessary. The minutes felt like hours, each breath sharp with tension. Finally, the signal came, a single flash of a lantern from a high tower window. It meant the king had left the throne room for his ritual. They moved quickly but cautiously, making their way inside through a servant's entrance. The corridors were mostly silent, though every scrape of their boots on stone seemed deafening to Eleanor's ears. Twice they had to hide as passing guards ambled by. Each time, her heart thundered so loudly she was sure they would be caught. Yet fortune was with them. They reached the doors to the throne room, massive wooden gates reinforced with iron. 2 guards stood watch, but they appeared bored, half-hearted in their duty. Perhaps the mania that gripped the city had worn down even the king's men. Lord Caraway whispered instructions. One knight slipped forward, tossing a small pouch near the guards. It hit the floor with a sudden noise, causing them to turn. At that moment, 2 other conspirators darted forward, knocking them unconscious with swift blows to the head. No blood was shed. Eleanor insisted they avoid unnecessary killing. Even in an act of rebellion, they must show mercy. They pushed open the doors. The throne room was vast, pillars rising toward a vaulted ceiling. Torches in wall sconces cast flickering patterns across the floor. And at the center of it all sat the Iron Throne, a looming silhouette of blades and barbs. Even from this distance, Eleanor felt a wave of dread crash over her. She nearly faltered, her muscles going rigid. The swords seemed to shift, the metal glinting as though alive. She forced herself to continue, setting her jaw against the fear. The pyromancers moved quickly, placing their barrels of wildfire around the base of the throne, each container carefully positioned to direct the blast upward. They worked in tense silence, each movement choreographed to minimize sound. As they worked, Eleanor stood watch, eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The hush in the room felt unnatural, too heavy. Suddenly, a shape flickered at the corner of her vision. She whirled around to see a silhouette of a cloaked figure stepping from behind a pillar. The figure's face was hidden, but Eleanor felt that searing cold presence she had come to associate with the cursed seat. She reached for her dagger. Before she could shout a warning, the figure raised a hand and uttered a guttural hiss. A swirl of dark energy crackled through the air. One of the knights let out a strangled cry, stumbling backward as though struck by an unseen force. Chaos erupted. The pyromancers dropped what they were doing, fumbling for protective measures. The cloaked figure advanced, moving with unnatural speed, shadows trailing in its wake. Eleanor darted forward, her dagger poised, but the figure evaded with a liquid grace. She felt a wave of nauseating energy wash over her, forcing her to her knees. The room spun, and for a moment she glimpsed the throne shimmering behind the intruder, the swords quivering in that otherworldly resonance. This was no ordinary guard or mage. This was an entity bound to the throne, perhaps an extension of its will. Lord Carroway, face contorted in determination, lunged at the intruder with his sword. Their blades met in a shower of sparks. The figure snarled, voice echoing in multiple tones, human and something else. With a powerful slash, the figure disarmed Carroway, sending him sprawling. But the distraction gave one of the knights time to tackle the assailant from behind, driving him to the ground. Eleanor forced herself back to her feet, head pounding. The pyromancers hurried to resume placing their barrels, their eyes wide with terror. The intruder twisted beneath the knight, unleashing another surge of dark force that sent the knight flying across the room. The intruder rose once more, their cloak torn, revealing a face that was pallid and stretched, eyes as black as voids. Eleanor felt raw anger roiling inside her. She sprinted, dodging a slash of darkness that arced through the air, and plunged her dagger into the figure's side. The blade bit flesh, and the intruder let out a rasping shriek that reverberated off the pillars. She twisted the dagger, refusing to relent. "Stay down," she growled, though her heart hammered in her chest. For a terrifying moment, the figure locked eyes with her, and she saw something ancient and hateful in that gaze. Then it collapsed, black ichor seeping from the wound, dissolving into steam as it touched the floor. No one spoke. Their heavy breaths filled the silence as the last echoes of that unholy scream faded. With trembling hands, Eleanor pulled her dagger free, wiping off the foul residue on her cloak. A wave of dizziness threatened to overwhelm her, but she steadied herself. She looked to Lord Carroway, who was slowly picking himself up, bruised but alive. The other knights regrouped, shaken but still determined. The pyromancers had finished setting the barrels. One of them turned to Eleanor and nodded, signaling they were ready. There was no time to process the horror of what they'd just faced. Quietly, they used fuses soaked in special oils to connect the barrels, preparing to ignite them. The plan was to create a controlled explosion, one that would incinerate the throne. But the infiltration had taken precious minutes, and they did not know how soon the king or his guards would return. They had to hurry. Eleanor motioned for everyone to move behind the pillars at a safe distance. She held the small torch that would light the fuse, her mind heavy with the enormity of what they were about to do. If it worked, if they truly destroyed the throne, King Aaron might be free, or he might remain irreversibly corrupted. In truth, there was no certainty, and there was the very real chance the wildfire could raise the entire throne room, or more if it spread. But caution had long since fled the city. They had only one path left. She brought the torch to the fuse. It caught, sputtering, then fizzed as the flame traveled along the cord. She sprinted with the others behind the nearest pillar, heart in her throat. The fuse hissed, sparks dancing across the floor until it vanished beneath the throne in a shimmer of green. A moment later, the night air split with a deafening roar. The barrels ignited, a column of green fire racing upward, consuming metal and stone alike. Heat slammed into Eleanor like a tidal wave, forcing her to shield her face. She could hear metal shrieking as if the swords themselves were howling in agony. For an instant, she thought she saw shapes, tormented silhouettes in the flames, as though ghosts of the sword's victims were released. The blaze intensified, forcing them all to retreat farther. Chunks of molten metal began to drip from the seat's structure, sparks flying in all directions. Smoke billowed, choking their lungs, and the entire throne room filled with the stench of burning steel and something more putrid. Eleanor coughed violently, her eyes streaming tears from the heat and fumes. The sound was deafening, an endless clamor of steel cracking and bursting. The pillars shook under the impact, bits of stone raining down from the ceiling. She glanced around, frantically trying to assess if the chamber would collapse. At that moment, an echoing cry split the chaos. Through the swirling smoke, King Aaron appeared at the far end of the room, flanked by startled guards. His eyes were wild, hair disheveled. He took in the inferno, the conspirators, the twisted shape of the throne melting like a candle, and for an instant, his face contorted with anguish so profound it almost looked human again. He let out a cry that was equal parts rage and despair, charging forward. The guards followed, weapons raised. One of the knights on Eleanor's side shouted in alarm, raising his own blade in defense. Battle erupted. King Aaron hurled himself at the conspirators with ferocity, as though possessed. Eleanor had seen him fight before. He was skilled, but never so blindly furious. Now it was as if something monstrous drove him. He slashed through one knight's guard, nearly killing the man, but Caraway blocked the finishing blow. Swords clanged, sparks flying in the flickering green light. The pyromancers retreated behind the pillars, unwilling or unable to engage in direct combat. Eleanor rushed to intercept another guard, parrying his strike with her dagger. Fear burned through her veins. The guard was stronger, forcing her back step by step. But then, from the corner of her vision, she saw Aaron stumbling, his eyes rolling back. The throne was collapsing behind him, molten steel dripping like molten tears. A shrill, otherworldly scream seemed to emanate from the conflagration. Everyone, king and conspirator alike, felt the unearthly resonance that vibrated through the walls. In that instant of dissonance, the guard faltered, his attention drawn to the dying throne. Eleanor seized the opening, driving her dagger under his arm. He dropped with a grunt, sword clattering. Nearby, Caraway dueled King Aaron, their blades locked. The king's face was contorted, sweat pouring down his cheeks. He shouted incoherently, a mad litany of curses and pleas, as though in the same breath he wanted to kill Caraway and also beg for help. Behind him, the Iron Throne's shape was hardly recognizable, a mass of superheated metal belching green flames. With a desperate maneuver, the king locked Caraway's blade aside and slammed the hilt of his sword into Caraway's jaw, sending him sprawling. Aaron's chest heaved, his eyes wild. Eleanor sprinted forward, calling his name. He turned, his gaze latching onto her. For a moment, something human flickered in his face, a memory of who he once was. He reached toward her, lips parted as though to say her name. Then the entire structure of the throne collapsed with a resounding crash, sending out a shockwave of heated air. Eleanor staggered, shielding her face. When the smoke cleared enough to see, Aaron lay on the ground, trembling violently. The sword he had carried was flung aside. Eleanor rushed to him, dropping to her knees, ignoring the scorching heat that radiated from the smoldering metal. She gently turned him onto his back. His eyes fluttered open, revealing confusion and pain. She saw tears at the corners of his eyes. In that instant, he looked like the man she had once known, a gentle soul who had dreamed of a better kingdom. Eleanor, he whispered, voice shaking. His hand groped for hers. She clasped it, trying to ignore the acrid smoke that made it nearly impossible to breathe. What have I done? His voice wavered, horror dawning as glimpses of memory returned. She squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her own cheeks, whether from sorrow or the sting of the smoke, she did not know. It wasn't you, she said softly, though she knew that was only partially true. It was the throne. It's gone now. Indeed, behind them, all that remained of the Iron Throne was a twisted mass of dripping slag and scattered blades, slowly cooling into lumps of metal, the green flames fading to embers. No one could sit upon that seat again. A hush fell over the throne room, broken only by the crackle of dying fire. The king's guards, those who remained conscious, lowered their weapons in shock at the sight of their once all-powerful monarch lying helpless on the ground. Aaron's lips quivered. He shut his eyes, tears escaping down his soot-streaked cheeks. My mind. I felt it whisper. I couldn't stop it, he murmured between ragged breaths. Eleanor gently brushed his damp hair back, feeling a surge of pity. Around them, the conspirators emerged from the smoke. Lord Caraway limped over, sporting bruises and cuts, but very much alive. The pyromancers stood at the periphery, expressions a mixture of awe and fear. The knights, at least those who remained standing, looked upon the melted throne with varying degrees of horror and relief. In the distance, alarm bells began to toll, no doubt summoned by the eruption of fire and the sounds of combat. They had little time before more guards or even the city garrison arrived. Eleanor looked at the king, her heart torn. If they were arrested now, if Aeron was seized and kept on the seat of power, well, there was no seat anymore, but the monarchy still existed. The question was, had King Aeron truly been freed of the curse, or was the corruption lingering in his soul? Could the city be persuaded to accept what they had done? Lord Carroway rested a hand on her shoulder. His eyes flicked to the king with a question in them. Eleanor knew they needed a plan. If Aeron could be rehabilitated, perhaps he might rule wisely, no longer under the throne's sinister influence. But would the realm ever trust him again? Would they trust the conspirators who had committed regicide on the seat of power? No easy choices remained. With a slow, solemn breath, Eleanor helped Aeron to stand, supporting his weight on her shoulder. He was shaky, disoriented, but alive. She looked at Carroway and spoke in a hushed tone that only he could hear. We can't let them take him away and execute him. He might yet do good. But neither can we allow him to slip back into tyranny. She paused, meeting Carroway's gaze. We need a gathering of lords, the faith, the people, a council to decide. Carroway studied her, then nodded slowly. Perhaps a great council could convene, akin to times past, to determine the fate of the monarchy in the absence of the Iron Throne. Aeron's lineage alone was not enough anymore. They guided the king, half-conscious and limping, away from the inferno. The group split up as the bells grew louder. Some conspirators went to deal with the oncoming guards to explain or at least stall them, while others attended the wounded. Eleanor took one last glance at the molten remnants of the throne. She thought she saw a shape move in the embers, a final wisp of shadow that dissolved into nothing. A chill ran down her spine. It was over. The Iron Throne was destroyed. Yet the cost had been high and the future was more uncertain than ever. Still, she felt a spark of hope. The realm was free from that cursed seat, and maybe now a better system of governance could emerge, one not bound by the madness of a single artifact. In the ensuing days, chaos rippled through the city. Rumors spread like wildfire. The Iron Throne was no more, melted into useless slag by traitors in the night. Some said it was the rightful end of a cursed symbol. Others decried it as an unforgivable crime against tradition. King Aeron, bedridden and haunted by shame and guilt, declared that he would abdicate if it was the will of the people. His confession before the small council was a harrowing account of the throne's whispers, how they had invaded his dreams, twisted his thoughts, driven him to monstrous acts he could barely recall. At first, many did not believe him, attributing his madness to mere mortal failings. But then testimonies from knights and servants who had witnessed the meltdown, who had seen that cloaked figure and heard its unearthly scream, added weight to the story. A council was called in haste, comprised of high lords, representatives of the faith, and even envoys from Dorne and the north. Eleanor, Lord Carroway, and others among the conspirators were given a chance to speak. Though many lords were enraged by the destruction of the throne, none could deny that King Aeron's reign had nearly destroyed the realm. In the end, after days of heated debate, it was decided that the monarchy could remain if Aeron could prove his sanity and if checks were placed on royal power. A new seat would be forged, not from swords but from simpler metal, a seat symbolizing duty rather than conquest. Whether Aeron would occupy it was uncertain. Some demanded his immediate abdication, others argued for leniency. The compromise reached was that Aeron would remain king in title, but a council of regents, including Lord Carroway and several other neutral lords, would oversee governance until he regained the trust of the realm. If he could not prove himself worthy, the council would choose a successor. Eleanor watched these events unfold with mixed feelings. She had not come to King's Landing seeking to topple a king or to incinerate centuries of royal tradition. She had only wanted to prevent further suffering, to free the realm from a dark power. Many hailed her as a hero, but just as many cursed her as a witch who had dared to burn the sacred seat of kings. Whenever she walked the streets now, she felt eyes upon her, some with gratitude, others with hatred. She tried to keep her head low to avoid stirring further controversy. It was Lord Carroway who urged her to remain at court as an advisor, for her insight into people's hearts and her unwavering courage. She hesitated, uncertain if she belonged in such a position. But she could not simply leave the realm in the midst of such a fragile transition. A few weeks after the throne's destruction, a ceremony was held in the Red Keep's courtyard, the Great Hall still under reconstruction. King Aeron, pale but more lucid than he had been in ages, addressed the court from a simple wooden dais. "I have sinned against the realm," he said, voice trembling. "Whether by my own weakness or by a power beyond my ken, I have brought ruin on my people. I accept whatever punishment or penance the council and the seven deem just. But know this, the artifact that once held us in thrall is gone. Let us learn from our mistakes. Let us seek to build a kinder realm, not on the edges of swords but on trust and mutual purpose." A hush settled over the gathered nobles. Some gazed on the king with pity, others with deep skepticism. Still, the seeds of a new beginning had been planted. In the following months, the city began to heal. The absence of the Iron Throne felt strange to many, as though a phantom limb had been severed. Yet the daily madness that had plagued King Aaron lifted, and no new horrors sprang from the seat of power. Eleanor worked alongside the council to organize relief for the famine-stricken villages. A portion of the royal treasury was directed to rebuilding roads and cleaning up the lawless highways. Knights loyal to the old ways resisted, but with the king's tacit support, now more of a figurehead than an absolute monarch, the reforms slowly gained traction. The realm was not yet at peace, but it had taken a vital step away from tyranny. At times, Eleanor would stand upon the battlements of the Red Keep, gazing out over the city. She thought of her mother's voice, the quiet wisdom that had shaped her from childhood. Power is a burden, not a prize. Watching the people bustle below, merchants haggling, children running in narrow alleys, blacksmiths hammering out new wares, she felt a cautious optimism. Though the roads ahead were uncertain and the scars of Aaron's reign remained, the realm at least had a chance to heal without that cursed seat in its midst. Privately, she still wrestled with guilt. She replayed the night in her mind, how she had plunged a dagger into that cloaked figure, how she had witnessed souls in the wildfire's glow, how Aaron had looked so broken when he awoke to his own atrocities. In her quieter moments, she wondered about the nature of evil, if it truly resided in inanimate objects or if it merely found a home in human hearts. Ultimately, perhaps the line was blurred. The throne had magnified the darkness within any ruler who claimed it, but that darkness was never entirely external. As the old text suggested, curses often latch onto existing weaknesses. True freedom required vigilance against the seeds of cruelty that could sprout even in the noblest soul. Then came a day when the city's blacksmiths unveiled the new royal seat, crafted under the council's directive. It was plain compared to the Iron Throne, made of polished oak, reinforced with steel along the arms and legs, but bearing no lethal edges, no echoes of a conquered past. The artisans had carved modest motifs of wheat sheaves and olive branches into the armrests, symbolizing nourishment and peace. Some mocked it as a farmer's chair. Others found it a refreshing departure from the Iron Throne's deadly grandeur. King Aaron, walking with a cane after an illness, approached the seat during a ceremonial presentation. The council, including Eleanor, stood around him. The king reached out, running a hand over the smooth wood. A hush fell, as if the entire realm held its breath to see if any new curse would emerge. Nothing happened. No whispers, no violent allusions. King Aaron lowered himself into the seat, exhaling a long breath. He closed his eyes and opened them again, tears welling. "It is quiet," he murmured. In that moment, more than one onlooker felt a surge of raw emotion. The king looked around at the gathered crowd, an odd humility in his gaze. No crown rested on his head. He had refused to wear it until the council agreed he had earned redemption. Even then, he swore he would wear it only on state occasions, a reminder that power did not belong to one man but to the realm itself. Eleanor felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Lord Caraway. His eyes shone with gratitude and relief. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. This was a beginning, not an end. The realm still had countless challenges, from rebellious lords to the scars of war and misrule. But at least they faced those challenges without an ancient evil perched above them, whispering poison into their sovereign's ear. Time passed. Seasons turned. Fields recovered with the timely distribution of seeds and grain from the royal coffers. A new sense of caution rippled through the nobility. No one wanted to see another fiasco like the meltdown of the Iron Throne. Many of the older lords still clung to tradition and lamented the loss of what they deemed the realm's rightful symbol of power. But the younger generation, especially those who had witnessed the horrors firsthand, embraced the new seat and the council's model of shared governance. The faith, too, preached about the humility of leadership, praising the destruction of the throne of pride. Eleanor stayed in King's Landing longer than she had anticipated. She served as a mediator between factions, a voice of reason when the council threatened to fracture under old rivalries. She helped draft new laws to protect the peasantry from exploitation, laws that would have been unthinkable under the old monarchy. Through it all, King Aaron's health wavered, but his mind, freed from the throne's malevolent influence, remained contrite and introspective. He never fully forgave himself for his cruelties, but he used that guilt as fuel to support reforms that lessened the burdens he had once inflicted. Over time, people stopped calling him the Mad King and began to speak of him as the king in mourning, for he mourned the kingdom he had nearly destroyed. Whenever visitors came to court from distant lands, curious about rumors of a melted throne, Eleanor would occasionally meet with them. She would explain, diplomatically, that the monarchy had shifted away from archaic trappings of conquest to a simpler, more humane philosophy. Some laughed, some scoffed, but a few were intrigued. A new wave of alliances began to form, less reliant on intimidation and more on mutual benefit. Trade agreements, cultural exchanges, small seeds of progress began to blossom. Yet, not all were satisfied. In hidden corners, pockets of zealots whispered that the realm had abandoned its birthright by destroying the throne. They performed secret rites, calling on whatever dark powers might remain to restore the old ways. Rumors spread of exiled lords gathering mercenary armies seeking to carve out their own domains under the banner of true monarchy. One day, Eleanor knew these embers could ignite a new conflict. But for now, the realm had been granted a reprieve. On the first anniversary of the throne's destruction, a modest ceremony was held in the courtyard of the Red Keep. King Aaron, still walking with a cane, stood before a smaller crowd, representatives of the council, some knights, and curious citizens. He spoke of the significance of that night, how a group of brave souls risked everything to free the realm from a legacy of blood-forged power. He praised Eleanor and Lord Caraway by name, though both had protested they deserved no special accolades. The king then walked over to a large forge set up in the courtyard. On a sturdy table lay the lumps of metal salvaged from the melted throne, hammered into crude ingots. Beside them rested a ceremonial hammer. One by one, members of the council stepped forward, placing an ingot into the forge's flame, watching it glow red, and then hammering it into new shapes. Over hours, the ingots were transformed into simpler objects, farming tools, building instruments, and small sets of chimes that produced melodic tones when struck. It was a symbolic act, returning metal once shaped for violence into instruments of utility or art. As Eleanor watched a set of these chimes being struck, releasing a gentle, harmonious sound, she felt tears in her eyes. Gone was the cacophony of swords clashing. In its place, a fragile harmony. She prayed silently it would last. After the ceremony, King Aaron approached her. His posture was bowed as if the burdens of his past weighed tangibly on his shoulders. "I want to thank you," he said softly, "for saving me from the throne and saving the realm. I know I can never make amends for what happened while I was enthralled, but if I can do one good thing before I die, it will be to ensure that no one person ever wields that kind of power again." She inclined her head, humbled. "It took many of us to achieve that, Your Grace. And there are still more battles ahead." Aaron glanced at the new seat, a simple, sturdy chair of oak and steel. "I know," he whispered. Then, with a faint smile, he tapped the cane on the stone floor. "But at least I can rest without nightmares." In that moment, she believed him. The weight of centuries of fear, tyranny, and tragedy had been lifted. The Iron Throne was no more. In its place stood a chance, fragile, precious, and wholly uncertain, for a kinder, more balanced realm. Eleanor reflected on her mother's words one final time: power does not come without price. This was the price they paid, in risk and in blood, to free the kingdom from a malevolent legacy. Now, perhaps, they could spend the rest of their days learning that lesson, building a future where the memory of that cursed seat remained only in old stories, cautionary tales told to children so they might never repeat the mistakes of their forebears. Yes, the Iron Throne had been a magical artifact that corrupted those who ruled. But now, with it gone, the realm could begin anew. And in that new dawn, Eleanor resolved to stand guard against any evil that might arise from the shadows, be it another cursed artifact or the darkness that lurked in the human heart. She would serve not as a conqueror, but as a protector, forging unity with open hands rather than clenched fists. Because she knew, more than ever, that the greatest throne one could build was in the hearts of those they loved and served. In the weeks that followed the forging of the new royal seat, an unassuming yet quietly dignified construction of polished oak and tempered steel, King Aaron walked the corridors of the Red Keep with careful steps. a single cane supporting him in place of the throne that once shattered his mind. Though much of the castle showed scars of the destruction wrought that fateful night, workers scurried daily around scaffolding to clear debris and reinforce weakened structures. The great hall itself was cordoned off, the high ceiling needing extensive repairs from where bits of masonry had rained down in the wildfire's explosive fury. On some mornings one could still smell a faint acrid tinge in the air, the ghost of green flames like a memory etched into the stone. Yet there was a sense of forward movement in the keep, an urgency to rebuild not just walls but confidence and perhaps even faith. Eleanor could see it in the expressions of the servants who once cowered in the shadows. When they passed King Aaron now, their bows or curtsies were respectful but not brimming with unspoken terror. There was still caution, yes, but also a flicker of hope, a fragile trust that maybe, this time, a better era was dawning. She observed such moments from the sidelines, still uncertain of her own role. She had not come to King's Landing seeking power for herself, but had wound up entangled in the realm's greatest upheaval in living memory. The Iron Throne was gone, destroyed by her own hand and the hands of those who believed in a future free from ancient curses. Now that the dust had settled, the question remained, what next? She rarely had time for introspection. Each day brought a new challenge. Displaced small folk arrived at the city gates seeking relief. They had heard rumors that the king's madness was cured, that the laws he once forced upon the kingdom were being undone, and that some measure of mercy might be found here in the capital. While it was true the monarchy had relaxed its harsh decrees, the city's resources were strained. Grain shipments trickled in slowly, the crown's treasury was far from limitless, and many noble lords still balked at the notion of King's Landing offering alms with no immediate gain. In the absence of absolute monarchy, the newly formed council had to deliberate, debate, and craft each decision with care. This was unfamiliar ground for a kingdom used to a single voice at the apex of power. People are starving outside the gates, Eleanor told the council one afternoon, her voice carrying across the newly refurbished meeting chamber. It was a modest hall, smaller than the Great Hall, with a long table set near a row of stained glass windows. Sunlight spilled through in shards of color, painting the old stone floor with hues of blue, red, and gold. We cannot turn them away, not if we hope to unify this realm. Lord Caraway, seated across from her, offered a thoughtful nod. Though his hair was tinged with silver and lines of worry marked his forehead, he had never lost the sharp intellect that once made him a trusted advisor to Aaron's father. We have a responsibility, he agreed. But we must find a way to do so without bankrupting the crown. If we act hastily, we invite opportunists from every corner of the realm. Seated at the head of the table, though it was no longer quite a throne in appearance, King Aaron gazed at them both with weary eyes. He wore simpler garments these days, a dark tunic embroidered with the sigil of House Targaryen at the sleeves and a ring of gold around one finger. No crown, no robes of state. He cleared his throat. Charity must be balanced with the realm's own resources. We've begun gathering surplus grain from the Reach, but the harvest there is still uncertain. We can divert some shipments, but not enough to sustain an endless stream of refugees. A murmur traveled among the other council members. They were a mix of lords and lordlings, a few knights, and 2 septons representing the faith. Each had a stake in the kingdom's fate, but each also had their own biases and ambitions. If Eleanor's experiences had taught her anything, it was that corruption did not vanish with the destruction of a single artifact. One had to remain vigilant against the corruption that arose in ordinary human hearts. A minor lord from the Stormlands, Lord Griswold, rapped his knuckles on the table. We might distribute farmland in the Crownlands to some of these displaced families. Let them work the land and supply the city in return. But we'd need coin to get them started, tools, seeds, livestock. Lady Grella, a stern-faced woman from the Westerlands, grimaced. An enormous investment. Our coffers are still recovering from the madness taxes, and we have other obligations too. Rebuilding roads, paying the gold cloaks, stabilizing the ports. Eleanor listened carefully. She understood the complexity of the dilemma. Charity alone would not solve the kingdom's troubles. They needed a more sustainable strategy. She waited for the arguments to swirl for a few minutes, then gently raised her hand, commanding the attention of the table. Lord Griswold's idea has merit, but perhaps we can secure alliances with local lords in the Crownlands. Offer them royal favor in exchange for ceding small parcels of land to be collectively worked by the refugees. The crown provides an initial fund, enough for seeds and tools, and in return the yields are taxed at a fair rate. Over time it could pay for itself. A rustle of murmurs followed. Some council members nodded. Others glanced at each other with uncertain expressions. Lord Caraway ran a hand over his beard in silent consideration. King Aaron shifted in his seat, wincing slightly. The old injuries from his enthrallment by the throne still plagued him, though he tried not to let the pain show. "I believe that is a workable solution," he said, voice subdued. "Draft a proposal, Eleanor. We'll present it to the Crownland lords." She inclined her head. This was her new place, it seemed. Part diplomat, part mediator, part visionary for a kingdom in flux. The meeting ended soon after, with the council dispersing in clusters. Some hurried off to check on supply logs, others to write letters to their home provinces. As the chamber emptied, King Aaron remained seated, eyes distant. Eleanor waited until it was just the two of them before approaching. "You look exhausted," she said gently. He managed a wry smile. "Even after the throne's destruction, I still feel its echoes in my sleep. Nightmares, guilt, regrets." He tapped his cane against the floor. A soft tap, then a pause as though measuring the silence that followed. "I suppose this is what it means to be mortal, to carry your own mistakes without any supernatural force to blame." Eleanor laid a hand on his shoulder. "You have plenty to atone for, Your Grace, but you are not alone in this. The council members might bicker, but they're here because they believe in a future for the realm." Aaron's eyes flickered with a faint glimmer of gratitude. "Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better had I stepped down entirely. Let another family take the crown. Targaryens have sat on that cursed seat for so long." "You've taken a step toward redemption by supporting these reforms," Eleanor replied. "If you'd simply walked away, we'd have a power vacuum. We need you stable and present to guide this transition. Abandoning your responsibilities now would only invite chaos." He gave a slow nod as though her words eased a small knot of doubt in his heart. "I pray the realm finds a measure of peace, and that I might someday forgive myself." He rose with her help, leaning on his cane. Together, they left the council chamber, walking through corridors flanked by the occasional guard. Though the tension in King's Landing had lessened, Eleanor could sense the city's wariness. The memories of the king's madness and the final conflagration lingered in every echo of footsteps upon the stone. Word of the new system of governance had spread beyond the capital. Many welcomed it, relieved that no tyrant would hold sway again. But there were also those who viewed this council-based rule as a travesty, a watering down of the Targaryen claim. Unrest brewed in places where noble families had once profited from the fear instilled by the monarchy's absolute power. In the north, some lords murmured that they might as well be fully independent if King's Landing was going soft. In the Reach, certain powerful bannermen quietly plotted how to leverage the new arrangement for even greater autonomy. And beyond the seas, foreign powers watched King's Landing's experiment with curiosity, uncertain if it heralded the kingdom's rise or its downfall. One afternoon, a raven arrived from Dorne, bearing a missive with the familiar Sunspear seal. Princess Arenal Martell invited a royal delegation to Sunspear to discuss a trade pact, possibly even a marriage alliance, to strengthen ties and unify the realm under the new order. The letter's tone was carefully neutral, but Eleanor caught the subtext. Dorne was testing the waters, seeing if the monarchy was stable enough to entertain alliances. King Aaron, once so notorious for his unpredictable decrees, now had to demonstrate a steady hand in diplomacy. Eleanor took the message to Lord Caraway, who scanned it with raised brows. "They request the king's presence, or at least that of someone with the authority to negotiate on his behalf. We can't ignore them." "Certainly not," Eleanor agreed. "It's the first official gesture of recognition from Dorne since the meltdown of the Iron Throne. But the journey is long, and the king's health is fragile." Caraway tapped his fingers against the table. "Perhaps you should go in his stead. You carry his trust, and you've proven more than capable of navigating courtly intrigue." She felt a pang of trepidation. "It's a weighty responsibility." "You've shouldered heavier burdens," he replied, eyes narrowing with a hint of a smile. "Besides, it'll do the king good to demonstrate that his counselors can act in full capacity. Show the realm we're not reliant on one man's presence. That was half the point of destroying the throne, wasn't it?" She couldn't argue that. In truth, part of her felt the tug of wanderlust. Despite the responsibilities at King's Landing, she had grown weary of the claustrophobic gloom that sometimes filled the Red Keep. A journey to Dorne, with its sun-scorched deserts and vibrant courts, might grant her a much-needed perspective. And if she could secure a beneficial treaty, it would help solidify the monarchy's new foundations. She agreed to take on the mission. Preparations began swiftly. A small retinue was assembled, including 2 knights, a handful of guards, and several scribes to handle the official documentation. The plan was to travel south via the Rose Road, then cut across the Prince's Pass into Dorne. King Aaron, informed of this arrangement, expressed his gratitude and concern in equal measure. He pressed Eleanor's hands in his, eyes grave. "Be cautious. Dorne is proud and sometimes prickly. They've never loved the Iron Throne or even the Targaryen name. You may find old grudges there." She nodded. "I'll keep my wits about me, Your Grace." On the morning of their departure, the sky was overcast, clouds drifting low, as though reluctant to let her leave. The courtyard of the Red Keep bustled with activity. Servants loading crates onto wagons, knights double-checking harnesses and saddles, stable boys calming the horses. Eleanor wore a traveling cloak of soft gray, practical boots, and a modest gown beneath, suited for the road but not lacking in stately bearing. At her waist hung a belt knife. She still remembered all too vividly how dangerous the roads could be. More than one memory of nighttime ambushes and hidden watchers in King's Landing told her never to let her guard down. Lord Carraway came to bid her farewell. "We'll keep the city intact for your return," he promised with a light chuckle, though there was genuine warmth in his eyes. "Take care of yourself." She inclined her head. "Keep the council from tearing itself apart while I'm gone." A grin touched his lips. "That's my daily occupation, is it not?" Then he stepped back to let King Aaron come forward, his cane softly tapping the cobblestones. There was a faint flush to the king's cheeks, whether from exertion or emotion. "Goddess grant you safe travels, Eleanor," the king said. "I trust your judgment in all matters. Remember, you represent not only me, but the dream we share. A realm governed by reason and compassion, not fear." She bowed slightly. "I won't forget." She wanted to say more, something reassuring, something that would chase away the shadows in his gaze, but too many ears were listening. Instead, she managed a final, encouraging look before she mounted her mare. The retinue formed behind her, the gates opened, and they rode out of the Red Keep in a procession of clattering hooves. As they descended into the streets of King's Landing, Eleanor noticed curious onlookers leaning out of windows or pausing in the busy lanes. Some recognized her, offering polite nods. Others merely watched the column of horses pass. In the past, the small folk might have hurled jeers or begged for coin at the sight of a royal party, but times were changing. Now, there was a cautious equilibrium in the air. King's Landing was still raw from trauma, still bearing the memory of tyranny and swirling green flames, but it was on the cusp of a new identity. Eleanor hoped, in her heart, that she could help shape that identity into something worth living for. They took the main thoroughfare south, passing the Dragon Pit's looming ruins on the hill above, then crossing the city walls. Once beyond the gates, the open road stretched ahead, winding past farmland that still showed signs of prior neglect. The retinue traveled at a steady pace, no outriders galloping ahead to clear the way with threats. Instead, 2 knights took point, scanning for brigands while the rest followed. Each night, they set up modest camps off the road, rotating watch shifts. Eleanor was relieved to find minimal trouble along the route. Rumors of the new king's governance might have deterred the lawless, or perhaps luck was simply with them. As they neared the border of the Stormlands, the sky turned consistently clearer, the air warmer. Wildflowers dotted the fields, and the occasional traveler they met had stories of improved trade caravans and less banditry. The wariness still clung to them. Once, a group of peasants recognized Eleanor's party as the king's men and offered thanks that the new order had lifted certain tyrannical taxes. Eleanor accepted their gratitude with measured humility. She knew how quickly fortunes could shift if the realm's fledgling stability faltered. After crossing into the Stormlands, they encountered a small retinue dispatched by Lord Selwyn Baratheon, an envoy to guide them through the region safely. It was another sign that the monarchy's new approach might be fostering alliances. In years past, she doubted the Baratheons would have so readily offered an escort without demanding heavy compensation. Their hospitality was gracious if somewhat reserved. Eleanor sensed that the Stormlords were carefully watching, perhaps testing how this newly shaped monarchy would behave. They continued south, cresting over the last barrier of green hills that sheltered the Stormlands from the deserts of Dorne. Each night, the stars grew clearer and the breeze carried a hint of dry heat. As they neared the prince's pass, the vegetation thinned, replaced by rocky outcrops and dusty shrubs. The sense of crossing a threshold into another world was palpable. Dorne's climate, culture, and temperament had always set it apart from the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. As Eleanor led her party forward, she recalled the stories her mother used to tell of Dornish independence, the times they resisted Targaryen conquest, even forcing dragons to retreat. It was a land of fierce traditions, proud families, and a memory that stretched back centuries. They arrived at the fortress gate that marked the true beginning of Dorne, a thick-walled structure guarded by a contingent of Dornish spearmen, their copper sun-and spear sigils glinting in the sunlight. A tall captain, skin-bronzed by the desert sun, approached. He assessed Eleanor's retinue with sharp eyes before speaking in a clipped accent. "You bring how many swords?" "Only a handful," Eleanor replied, pulling back her hood so he could see her face. "We're emissaries from King Aeron Targaryen and his council here at the invitation of Princess Arenal Martell." He studied her for a moment longer, then signaled for the gates to open. "Welcome to Dorne. You'll have an escort from here to Sunspear." The Dornish escort proved both hospitable and vigilant. Their captain, a man named Khalif, was surprisingly amiable once initial formalities were observed. He rode alongside Eleanor at times, pointing out the hills where hidden watchtowers were nestled or the desert flowers that bloomed only at dawn. "You may find Dorne different than the rest of the kingdom," he said, a hint of pride in his tone. "We do not forget the burning of our fields or the flight of dragons, but we look to the future." Eleanor chose her words carefully. "We've destroyed the artifact of conquest," she said quietly, "the Iron Throne. Our king wants to heal old wounds, to respect local governance." Khalif's gaze flicked over her, assessing whether she spoke truly. "Perhaps we will see," he said at length. "Princess Arenal is known for her wisdom but also for her caution. The Martells had their own sense of justice." It took 2 more days of travel across the scorching roads and winding passes to reach the outskirts of Sunspear. The first glimpse of the city was breathtaking. White and gold walls rising above shimmering dunes, spires that looked almost like spears piercing the brilliant blue sky, and a vibrant tapestry of palm-lined avenues beyond the gates. To the east lay the sea, its waters an impossible turquoise color. Eleanor's party rode through the wide gates, greeted by the clang of bells that signaled visitors of high station had arrived. Sunspear's streets were unlike those of King's Landing, narrower, more labyrinthine, yet bursting with life. Markets displayed exotic fruits, spices, and textiles in a riot of color. Aromas of saffron, grilled fish, and sweet wine wafted through the air. Dornish men and women strode by wearing loose-fitting robes or bold, flowing garments that both warded off the heat and accentuated their graceful movements. They gave curious glances to the newcomers, though no open hostility. Children ran laughing through the shadows between stalls. Everywhere, there was a sense of pride in place, as if the city itself bristled with autonomy. The escort guided them to the old palace, a sprawling complex of sandstone walls, arches, and graceful balconies that overlooked the sea. There, under the watchful eyes of the Martell household guard, the travelers were shown to suites of cool, tiled chambers to wash away the dust of the road. Servants offered bowls of water steeped with fragrant herbs, soft towels, and fresh garments more suitable for the desert climate. Eleanor accepted these amenities gratefully, noting how much simpler life was without 1,000 responsibilities pressing at her every moment. Though, of course, she was here on a mission that demanded diplomacy. By early evening, a page arrived to inform Eleanor that Princess Arenal would receive her in the Sunburst Hall. Eleanor changed into a light gown in shades of pale gold, pinned her hair back in a neat braid, and slipped on sandals that wouldn't tap too loudly on stone floors. Her heart thrummed as she walked the corridors. She had met a Martell only once before, years ago, at a fleeting court appearance in King's Landing. Now she came bearing new tidings of a monarchy in transformation, uncertain how Dorne would react. The Sunburst Hall was aptly named. The setting sun's rays filtered in through stained glass windows, casting the room in shimmering patterns of gold and orange. Potted citrus trees lined the walls, their blossoms perfuming the air. At the far end, beneath a carved screen depicting a spear piercing a rising sun, sat Princess Arenal Martell. She was a woman of early middle years, hair dark as ink, eyes alert and calculating. Her attire was both regal and minimal, a flowing robe of crimson embroidered with delicate gold suns, cinched at the waist by a thin belt. She did not rise as Eleanor approached, but gave a nod of acknowledgement, a small gesture that carried the weight of formality in Dorne. "Your Highness," Eleanor said with a respectful bow. "I am Eleanor of King's Landing, advisor to King Aeron Targaryen and member of his council. Thank you for your invitation." Aeronal regarded her calmly. "I have heard tell of you, Lady Eleanor, or perhaps I should say simply Eleanor, if the rumors of your new style of governance hold true. Titles seem to be in flux these days." A subtle test. Eleanor smiled politely. "We still observe courtesy, but yes, the monarchy seeks a more balanced relationship with the lords and the people. I come to discuss how Dorne might benefit from a new era of cooperation." Princess Aeronal arched an eyebrow. "Your king sends an emissary, but not himself. Does he fear leaving the Red Keep now that his precious seat of swords is melted?" Eleanor maintained her composure. "He's unwell still, recovering from the aftereffects of the throne's influence. Our council stands in for him where needed, but he entrusted me specifically with these negotiations. He believes in bridging old divides." A murmur of conversation passed among a small cluster of courtiers behind the princess, all clad in Dornish finery. Aeronal seemed to consider Eleanor carefully, as if appraising not only her words but her posture, her bearing, and the sincerity in her eyes. At last, she waved a hand, and a servant poured wine into 2 slender cups. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to a set of cushioned chairs near the dais. "Let us speak openly." Gratefully, Eleanor took a seat, noticing that Aeronal's own seat was positioned so she could see the entire hall, including the elaborate windows. Dornish rulers, it was said, prized an unobstructed view of everything around them, symbolic of their unwillingness to be blindsided. She sipped the wine, tasting a sweet, slightly spiced flavor unique to Dorne. The next hour was spent discussing matters of trade. Aeronal wanted open routes for Dornish goods, especially their prized wines, spices, and patterned silks, through the Crownlands and beyond, without burdensome taxes. In return, she offered the potential for shipments of saffron, citrus fruits, and medicinal herbs that Dorne specialized in cultivating. Eleanor pressed for a reduction in tariffs on Crownland textiles entering Dorne. Both recognized the value of forging new ties. Yet the more delicate subject soon arose: marriage alliances. "Word reaches me," Aeronal said, tapping a long, bejeweled finger against the rim of her cup, "that King Aeron is unwed. The Targaryens have a complicated history with marriage alliances, but perhaps you have turned over a new leaf." There was an edge of playful challenge in her tone. "My youngest cousin, Arianne, is of age. She's been taught well in matters of diplomacy, and of course, in the Dornish tradition, she's no timid flower." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. King Aeron's personal life was a precarious matter, especially given his recent transformation. "The king has no immediate plans to marry," she said carefully. "He's focused on solidifying the realm's peace." That might be, but the realm's peace often hinges on the union of houses, does it not? Princess Aeronal sipped her wine, eyes flicking over Eleanor. "I've heard that your king is repentant these days, that he's quite changed from the man who once threatened to burn villages on a whim." She set her cup down, gaze unwavering. "I wonder if that transformation is genuine. You must have seen him before and after." Eleanor remembered Aeron on the Iron Throne, eyes haunted by madness, voice cold as ice. She also remembered him collapsing in the throne room after the meltdown, whispering her name, tears in his eyes. She answered truthfully, "He is a different man now, Your Highness. The throne's hold was real. Without it, he bears guilt, regret, and a desire to mend what he has broken." Aeronal studied her face. "You speak with conviction. I will keep that in mind." She paused, letting the moment linger. "For now, let us focus on trade agreements. Marriage can be a next step if trust develops. That trust must be earned, not merely demanded. I've heard enough demands from Targaryens in the past to last several lifetimes." Eleanor inclined her head. "Agreed. Trust is something we're eager to foster with Dorne, but will not force matters of the heart for mere political gain." A flicker of surprise passed through the princess's eyes as though she hadn't expected such candor. "Then let us proceed with a formal draft. We shall see what fruit grows from these negotiations." They parted on that cautiously optimistic note. Over the next days, Eleanor and the scribes from both courts drafted a framework for a treaty. Most of it involved tariff reductions, mutual pledges of non-aggression, and improved cooperation on border security, especially around the Prince's Pass, which bandits sometimes plagued. Parallel to those negotiations, rumors swirled among the Dornish courtiers about King Aeron's rumored interest, or lack thereof, in a Martell bride. Eleanor deflected probing questions with grace, focusing on the immediate tasks at hand. In her downtime, she wandered the corridors of the old palace, marveling at the tapestries that depicted Dornish victories against dragons or the mosaic floors that told tales of Princess Nymeria's voyage from Essos. The air was always warm, the breezes carrying salt and citrus, and she found herself oddly at peace. Nights were filled with gatherings in courtyard gardens where musicians played the lute and women danced barefoot on tiles warmed by the fading sun. Servants brought trays of pomegranate juice, spiced lamb, and honey dates. Eleanor's presence at these gatherings was politely received. Some courtiers asked her about King's Landing, the meltdown, the new seat of governance. She answered with practiced diplomacy, mindful of every word. Yet not all in Dorne welcomed her so warmly. She noticed a certain group of lesser nobles who eyed her from the sidelines, whispering behind fans, their gazes occasionally betraying open skepticism. One evening, while strolling alone in a garden, she heard voices in a secluded alcove. She paused, concealed behind a flowering vine, listening to two Dornish lords speak in hushed but tense tones. They were complaining that trusting Targaryens and their minions was foolish, that all these sweet words are worthless if the king decides on war again. It was a reminder that the scars of conquest ran deep. Even the destruction of the Iron Throne might not erase centuries of resentment. Eleanor quietly slipped away without confrontation. After nearly a fortnight of complex bargaining, a ceremony was held in the old palace's courtyard to formalize the trade pact. A small dais was set up, draped in cloth of gold edged with the Martell colors. Eleanor, standing beside Princess Aeronal, watched as scribes unrolled the final parchment. The terms were read aloud, detailing lower tariffs, guaranteed safe passage for merchants, and an intent to discuss further alliances in due time. As the official seals were affixed, the Sun-Ann Spear of House Martell, the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen, scattered applause rippled among the witnesses. Princess Aeronal turned to Eleanor with a small, satisfied smile. "A start," she said softly, "but a momentous one. If your king abides by this in good faith, Dorne may yet accept that the monarchy has changed." Eleanor felt relief wash over her. "Thank you for trusting us, Your Highness. I promise to return to King's Landing with news of this success. We will uphold our word." She expected Aeronal to dismiss the gathering then, but instead, the princess beckoned a servant carrying a silver tray with 2 cups of spiced wine. "Let us toast to new beginnings," Aeronal announced, loud enough for all to hear. "May the sun's rays guide us to a more peaceful tomorrow." Eleanor lifted her cup, trying not to show her surprise at the public display of camaraderie. The watchers around them mirrored the gesture. The wine was rich, scented with cinnamon and pepper, carrying a heady warmth that spread through her chest. She caught the gaze of a few skeptical courtiers in the crowd, but to her relief, most seemed genuinely pleased by the resolution. She realized that many in Dorne wished for prosperity over endless strife. That night, her retinue prepared for departure in the following days, content that the mission had succeeded beyond initial expectations. Yet as Eleanor lay on a cushioned bed in her guest chamber, listening to the distant surf and the hush of desert winds, a sense of unease crept over her. She recalled the conversation she had overheard, Dornish lords still distrustful, and the centuries of bad blood that might not be dispelled by a single treaty. She also worried about the fledgling stability in King's Landing. What if, in her absence, old factions rose again or new intrigues took root? And what if foreign powers, like the free cities across the narrow sea, saw the monarchy's transitional state as a weakness to exploit? Sleep did not come easily. Eventually, the lull of waves and the rustle of palm fronds coaxed her into a restless doze. She dreamed of the melted Iron Throne, twisted spires of steel dripping in green flame. A shapeless figure emerged from the molten metal, whispering her name in a voice that echoed through caverns of darkness. Then the scene changed, a desert wind blowing cinders across the dunes, the sun setting in a sky of blood, and silhouettes of watchers wearing black cloaks, their eyes glimmering with malice. She awoke with a gasp, heart pounding. Though the dream subsided in the light of morning, she couldn't shake a lingering disquiet. Nevertheless, duty called. She dressed, met the guards, and prepared to take formal leave of Princess Arenal. The princess received her in a shaded courtyard, where fountains trickled and bright flowers spilled from urns. Arenal's expression was composed, her parted lips hinting at a polite smile. "Safe travels, Eleanor of King's Landing," she said. "You have the gratitude of Sunspear for these negotiations. May your king find the same reason that guided you here." Eleanor bowed. "Thank you, Your Highness. I'll carry your words back to our council." Without further ceremony, she and her retinue departed the old palace, passing through Sunspear's bustling lanes one last time. The journey back promised to be just as long, though a sense of accomplishment gave the traveling party a lighter mood. Over the coming weeks, they traced their route northward, halting in border towns to rest or meet local officials who were curious about the new treaty with Dorne. At each stop, Eleanor received glimpses of a kingdom tentatively leaning away from fear and into cautious optimism. Farmers took note of potential trade expansions. Innkeepers considered new menus featuring Dornish spices. Guards along the roads spoke of fewer brigands. It seemed the realm was stirring with possibilities. Yet problems lurked. The roads were still riddled with leftover devastation from King Aeron's prior reign. Eleanor spotted more than a few abandoned farms. Their fields turned to weed-choked wastelands. She heard rumors of a sickness in one coastal town where no maester had visited in months because the local lord's retinue had deserted him, leaving the territory lawless. These were all symptoms of a realm still healing from deep wounds. She promised herself to raise these concerns in the council upon her return. Finally, the spires and walls of King's Landing came into view, illuminated by the last rays of sunset. After weeks away in the scorching desert, the damp, bustling capital felt almost alien. The city gates welcomed her retinue with minimal fuss. As they wound their way through crowded streets, vendors hawking wares, children shouting, the odor of fish and horse manure thick in the air, Eleanor noted that the tension that once choked the city had eased. She saw fewer armed guards patrolling heavily. She saw more gatherings of citizens trading or socializing in the open, a small but meaningful sign of returning normalcy. Inside the Red Keep, she was greeted by a cluster of familiar faces. Lady Sephra, who had once sheltered her. Sir Dalen, a young knight who had fought in the throne room that night of the meltdown, and other council aides who hurried forward to help with the baggage and ledgers. Lord Caraway was in the courtyard, leaning on a staff. His old wounds acted up in cold weather. He lifted a hand in greeting. "You've returned in one piece," he said by way of welcome, a grin softening his usually serious expression. "Tell me we have good news." She dismounted, feeling a pleasant ache in her limbs. "We have more than good news. A formalized trade pact, with promises of dialogue about a broader alliance. Princess Arenal is open to building a new relationship. I have the signed documents for the council." He let out a quiet chuckle of relief. "You've done us proud. The day you left, half the council was anxious whether Dorne would even speak to us. They threatened to behead your retinue if the negotiations went sour." She shrugged off her traveling cloak. "It seems they're willing to move past old enmities, at least in trade. Marriage alliances will require more trust, but we've taken the first step." Caraway placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then come in and warm yourself. Let's get you fed. The king awaits your report in the solar." Though exhaustion tugged at her, Eleanor nodded and followed him. They climbed the familiar corridors, past tapestries depicting Targaryen dragons. Most of the older references to the Iron Throne had been quietly removed, some out of fear, others out of shame. Yet the memory of that melted monstrosity lingered in the keep's collective consciousness. She wondered if that final, terrible night had made these halls feel more cavernous, or if she simply saw them with different eyes now. King Aeron's solar was a modest chamber with tall windows facing the city, the view tinted with the purples of twilight. The king stood by a table strewn with parchments and maps. He wore a simple tunic and breeches, looking more like a scholar than a monarch. At the sight of Eleanor, a measure of tension ebbed from his face, replaced by a tentative smile. "Welcome back," he said softly. He took a step toward her, leaning lightly on his cane, though his posture had improved in recent weeks. "I'm relieved to see you well," she bowed. "Your Grace, the negotiations with Dorne were fruitful. I have the official documents. I believe you'll be pleased with the terms." He exhaled a slow breath, as though releasing some private dread. "That is a blessing indeed." Then he studied her face, noticing the weariness. "You look exhausted from the road. Let me not keep you in endless discussion tonight. A brief summary will suffice. We can address the details with the council tomorrow." Eleanor gave him the highlights. The tariff reductions, open trade routes, mutual pledges to reduce border skirmishes, and the cautious possibility of deeper alliances in the future. As she spoke, she saw Aaron's eyes light with genuine hope. "Well done," he murmured. "It seems Dorne might join us in forging this new approach." Lord Carroway, who had joined them in the solar, cleared his throat. "Shall we convene the rest of the council now?" Aaron shook his head. "Tomorrow morning. Let Eleanor rest." His gaze drifted to her again. "Thank you. You've done more for this realm than I could ever repay." She felt a gentle warmth at his words, but it was tinged with the old sorrow in his eyes, that constant reminder of the man he had once been. "I merely did my duty," she replied. "I must rest now, but tomorrow there is much to discuss. These roads in the Stormlands, the neglected farms, and a sickness in a coastal town." He raised a hand in a gesture of reassurance. "All of it tomorrow. Go, rest." She nodded gratefully, bidding them both good night. She withdrew from the solar, her footsteps echoing in the corridor. She walked to the chamber that had been set aside for her, one with a view over the city's rooftops. The bed there, a four-poster draped with modest fabric, seemed an impossible luxury after the weeks of roughing it on the road. She undressed slowly, changed into a comfortable linen shift, and sank onto the mattress. Her bones ached, but her mind churned, replaying the images of Dorne's sun-scorched courtyards, the negotiations, Arenal's penetrating gaze, the new orphans of the realm. Sleep finally overcame her, weaving threads of desert dreams with the hum of King's Landing nightlife. Early dawn brought a subtle knock at her door. She opened it to find a servant bearing a tray with bread, fruit, and watered wine. Simple fare, but a welcome gesture of normalcy. After a hasty breakfast, she joined the rest of the council. The meeting chamber felt as she remembered. The same polished table, the same mixture of anxious, talkative lords, though now there seemed a bit less hostility in the air. Lord Griswold from the Stormlands greeted her with a respectful nod. Lady Grella from the Westerlands looked eager to hear news of Dorne, and two septons wearing austere robes awaited her report with hands folded in piety. Eleanor distributed copies of the treaty. The council examined each clause, occasionally pausing to raise questions. Most seemed pleased, if a bit surprised, at how smoothly the negotiations had gone. A minor wave of excitement rippled through them when she mentioned the possibility of a royal marriage to unite Targaryen and Martell lines. King Aaron, for his part, seemed to take those speculations in stride, though he did not commit to any course. He was more absorbed in the practical aspects, how soon Dorne's goods might flow north, whether their caravans required additional security, and how to reassure lords whose lands adjoined the marches. This was the side of Aaron that Eleanor appreciated most, thoughtful, methodical, compassionate. When the formal business concluded, the king rose. "Before we adjourn, I wish to address something else. The council has grown more stable these past months, but our realm is vast and many concerns lie outside these walls. I plan to send out commissioners, men and women of integrity, to assess the needs of our people directly. Let them see which villages still languish, which highways remain unsafe, and what local lords require to keep the peace." A wave of murmurs went around the table. One lord frowned slightly, perhaps wary of roving inspectors. Others seemed cautiously intrigued. Eleanor felt a surge of approval. This was precisely the sort of initiative the realm needed. Lord Carroway cleared his throat. "This idea has merit, Your Grace. We must ensure the commissioners are above corruption. They'll need not only the king's mandate but also a means to defend themselves." "Yes," Aaron said, a hint of excitement creeping into his voice. "We'll choose them carefully. A small guard detail for each. And they must have the authority to gather information without fear of reprisal from local powers." Eleanor spoke up. "I'd be willing to oversee the selection process. I can recommend a few from the Crownlands who've proven their honor. We might also consider knights from other regions for balance. The king offered her a nod of gratitude. Indeed. Let us begin with that as soon as possible. The commissioners should depart before winter sets in so they can travel more freely. With that, the council adjourned. The members dispersed in small knots, discussing the new proposals. Eleanor and Caraway lingered behind, sifting through leftover parchment and notes. It was then that she noticed a sealed message on the table bearing no obvious heraldry. She picked it up curiously. The wax was a plain gray, the note addressed simply to the King's Council. Caraway raised an eyebrow. Curious. Perhaps a petition from some minor lord. Eleanor broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. Scrawled within, in rough handwriting, were only a few lines. You think the realm is free of curses? The Iron Throne was only the start. Look beyond your city walls. Darkness gathers still. There is more than one artifact in this world. If you care for your precious king, you will heed this warning. There was no signature. Her pulse quickened. What is this? She said softly, handing it to Caraway. He read it, lips tightening. Another rumor of some hidden threat, he murmured. Some desperate attempt to stir fear or gain attention. Or a genuine warning, Eleanor countered. She thought back to her dream of molten steel and the shadow emerging. We cannot ignore the possibility that the Iron Throne wasn't the only cursed relic in the realm. Caraway sighed. There have always been rumors of dark artifacts, hidden magic, secret swords, or chalices said to bestow unnatural power. The old histories are filled with such tales. But we can't chase every phantom. Eleanor studied the note. The sense of dread it invoked felt too similar to her dream, to the presence she'd once felt near the throne. She recalled how that cloaked figure in the throne room had seemed to channel some dark force. Could it be that fragments of that power lingered elsewhere? I agree we can't chase every rumor, she said carefully. But perhaps we should discreetly look into any known references to such artifacts. Caraway nodded, though she could see hesitation in his eyes. I'll have a few archivists check the Royal Library for leads. In the meantime, we continue with the tasks at hand. The realm needs roads, harvests, and stable leadership more than ghost hunts. She understood his pragmatism, but she couldn't entirely dismiss the unsettling possibility that the meltdown of the Iron Throne had stirred forces or revealed vulnerabilities. Nonetheless, she slipped the note into her belt pouch, resolving to keep it in mind. Over the next days, she immersed herself in the selection of commissioners, reviewing letters of recommendation, interviewing knights and ladies known for their honesty. Each day brought a new flurry of activity, minor lords seeking favor, outlying regions reporting improvements or setbacks, the faith petitioning for financial support to restore a burned sept. King Aaron threw himself into these matters with a dogged determination that made Eleanor both proud and concerned for his health. Despite his cane, he paced across chambers, conferring with advisors, scrawling notes, laboring through the labyrinth of governance. She saw him late one evening, hunched over a desk, eyes dark with strain, a half-eaten supper cold on a tray. She gently reminded him to rest, that the realm's problems would still be there tomorrow. He smiled wryly, admitting he feared rest might bring nightmares or the creeping sense of unworthiness that never quite left him. You truly believe the realm can forgive? He asked her, voice hushed in the lamplit gloom of the study. I do, she said, placing a hand over his. But only if you forgive yourself enough to move forward. This is not about forgetting, it's about proving each day that you've changed. People will see it, given time. He squeezed her hand briefly, then pulled away, a faint flush coloring his cheeks. I'll try, he murmured. Truly, I will. Autumn crept in with a subtle shift in the air. Leaves in the Crownlands turned gold and red, mornings grew brisk. Caraway's archivists found no immediate references to other major artifacts as infamous as the Iron Throne, though they reported plenty of scattered legends about lost blades, cursed idols, or relics from the Age of Heroes. Nothing stood out as a clear threat, nor did they find any clue about who might have sent the warning note. Still, Eleanor felt an undercurrent of unease. She found herself glancing around corners more often, half expecting to see black-cloaked watchers again. She even revisited the rubble-strewn throne room where workers still toiled to shore up structural damage. A tarp covered the spot where the throne once stood. She placed a hand on the cold stone floor, remembering the night of conflagration, recalling the hiss of steel turning liquid. The memory left her unsettled. One crisp morning, as the city bustled with preparations for a minor harvest festival, Eleanor stepped onto a balcony overlooking the training yard. She watched a small group of knights go through drills, lunging, parrying, forming shield walls. Among them was a slight figure she recognized, Sir Ellis, a young knight who had joined the king's retinue after the meltdown. He'd proven himself brave, though somewhat brooding. Eleanor admired his dedication. Something about his stance reminded her of the gloom that once hung over Aaron. She resolved to speak with him if only to ensure there were no hidden troubles. She descended to the yard, the chill breeze stirring her hair. Sir Ellis was wiping sweat from his brow when he noticed her approach. "My lady," he greeted with a courteous bow. "You honor me by watching our drills." She smiled. "I merely observe. How fare you? You've been in the capital a few months now." He lowered his gaze slightly. "Well enough. I've found reason and purpose here." Then, as if compelled, he added, "I used to serve a lord who lost his life during King Aaron's darkest times. I took my vows under him. When he died, I felt adrift." Her heart clenched. "I'm sorry. You know the king regrets all that happened." Sir Ellis nodded, though a flicker of conflict moved behind his eyes. "I believe it. But belief doesn't revive the dead." He paused, inhaling the crisp air. "Still, better to build a future from what remains than let bitterness consume me. That's why I pledged my sword to the capital." Eleanor laid a hand on his shoulder. "I'm glad you did. The king needs strong, principled knights around him now. And the realm needs them even more." He offered a subdued smile. "Thank you, my lady." She left him to his drills, her mind heavy with the knowledge that many in the realm carried losses from Aaron's reign. Each day, the new monarchy would have to earn its place in their hearts. The forging of a peaceful future was a slow, delicate process. Time advanced, carrying autumn into the cusp of winter. The harvest festival brought a brief respite. Stalls in the city squares offered pies, roasted chestnuts, and mulled wine. Jugglers performed on corners, children squealed with excitement, and for a few days, King's Landing felt almost jubilant. Eleanor walked among the revelers one evening, disguised in a simple cloak, accompanied by Lady Sephra. Music drifted from a troupe of minstrels. Everywhere, the flicker of torchlight turned the streets into a kaleidoscope of dancing shadows. "This is what it could be like all the time," Lady Sephra remarked, biting into a sugared plum. "If only the realm stays at peace." Eleanor observed the swirl of people, the myriad of faces. "Peace is a rare gift. We must treasure it, protect it." They turned a corner into a quieter lane, away from the main festivities. Before they reached the next intersection, Eleanor froze. A hooded figure stood in the shadows, watching them. She couldn't see his face, but the posture, the angle of his head reminded her of those watchers who had haunted her steps long ago. Her heart thudded. But then he turned, melted into the gloom, and was gone. Lady Sephra sensed her tension. "Eleanor." She shook her head. "It's nothing, probably just a drunk reveler." Yet her pulse insisted otherwise. She recalled the warning note about other artifacts, other curses. Paranoia? Perhaps. But something was shifting in the realm's undercurrents. The next morning, she found a fresh note slipped under her chamber door, bearing the same unmarked gray seal. Dread pulled in her stomach as she read. "The Watchers are real. You saw one last night. Do not dismiss it. They search for that which remains. Speak to the shadows if you dare. Or better yet, call them forth by name." The darkness did not die with the throne. She stared at the words, the hair on her neck prickling. Each line dripped with cryptic implication. Call them forth by name, what name? She thought of the old manuscripts that spoke of the forging of the Iron Throne and the souls trapped within it. Could this be related to the entity that possessed King Aaron, that had manifested in the throne room? She realized abruptly that she never discovered the true identity of that cloaked assailant she killed in the meltdown. Caraway had assumed it was some twisted sorcerer bound to the throne. But if more such individuals lurked in the kingdom? Determined not to let fear paralyze her, she took the note straight to Caraway. He read it, face turning grim. "It seems your anonymous informant is persistent. I'll have the gold cloaks investigate any suspicious hooded figures from last night's festival. Though that might be half the city," he added with a sardonic twist of his mouth. "The Watchers," Eleanor said pensively. "I remember them from the days before the meltdown, men lurking around corners, wearing black cloaks. I always felt they served the throne more than Aaron. It's possible some remain waiting for something." Caraway tapped the parchment. "We must be careful not to chase ghosts. Let's keep this contained. If we alert the king, he might succumb to fear or guilt. Let's gather concrete evidence first." She disliked hiding anything from Aaron, but she also understood Caraway's concern. The king had made progress, but his spirit was still fragile. Any hint that the same evil might be resurfacing could unravel the confidence he worked so hard to rebuild. Eleanor agreed to keep the matter discreet for now. She decided to consult the pyromancers, those who had helped them destroy the throne with wildfire. They were reclusive, but they might have insight into the possibility of leftover curses or akin enchantments. Late that evening, she donned a plain cloak and under the cover of darkness, slipped out of a postern gate. 2 guards accompanied her at a distance for safety. She navigated the winding alleys near the Blackwater Rush, searching for the unmarked door beside a broken lantern, just as she had months before. The stench of fish guts and rotting seaweed mingled with the rank odor of the cramped district. She found the door, gave the coded knock, and was admitted by a silent figure in a soot-stained robe. The narrow corridor was lit by the sickly glow of green torches, reminding her all too well of wildfire's destructive power. She passed shelves cluttered with vials of ominous liquids, half-melted candles, and curious instruments used in the pyromancer's craft. Finally, she was ushered into a chamber where the masked master awaited, the same one who had presided over the creation and deployment of the wildfire barrels that ended the throne. Her reflection stared back from the polished metal of the mask, which was shaped in the visage of a dragon's face, bizarre and unsettling. The master's voice emerged in a whispery rasp. "Eleanor of the Council returns. What stirs your interest in the green flame again?" She kept her voice steady. "We need knowledge, not fire. Information about curses that might persist even after the throne's destruction. About watchers who served the throne's dark influence." A pause. The masked figure exhaled slowly, the sound echoing. The Iron Throne was a nexus of power, forged in blood and dragon fire. Destroying it did not erase the energies that once fed upon it. Some of that power may have scattered, like embers carried on the wind. "Are these watchers you speak of acolytes of that same darkness?" A slight tilt of the head. "Possibly." Eleanor's heart pounded. "We suspect they're gathering again. Someone sends me notes warning of another artifact or further curses. Do you know anything about such remnants?" The master tapped a gloved finger against the armrest of a chair. "Only rumors. Whispers that certain cults once worshipped the swords, believing them to hold the spirits of the slain. These cults were never fully stamped out. Some might yearn to reforge the throne or harness the leftover energies for their own ends." A shrug. "We pyromancers are not sorcerers in that sense. We deal in flame, not necromancy. We have no direct knowledge, but we can share with you a lead. A certain library beneath Rook's Rest is said to contain records from the age of Aegon's conquest. If any clue remains, it might be found there." Rook's Rest was a castle in the Crownlands, once heavily involved in Targaryen lore. Eleanor felt a rush of urgency. "Then we'll investigate." "Thank you." The master inclined their head. "Beware the shadows. Wildfire can burn them away, but the cost is often steep." Leaving that cryptic warning behind, she exited the lair. The guards escorted her back to the keep, where midnight's hush blanketed the courtyards. The next day, after briefing Caraway, she proposed a small expedition to Rook's Rest under the pretense of collecting old records for the king's new commissioner's project. Caraway gave a curt nod. Better to find out if anything lurks there than sit idle waiting for these watchers to strike. Within 2 days, Eleanor set out with a modest escort, Sir Ellis among them, plus a scholarly scribe named Marek, well-versed in reading old Valyrian script. The ride to Rook's Rest took them a day's travel east, through rolling farmland that still bore the scars of Aeron's misrule. Rook's Rest itself was a stout, foreboding castle atop a rocky prominence, famed for its historical significance in Targaryen conflicts. The current Lord Sunglass, had a polite but distant reputation. They arrived at twilight. Dark clouds loomed overhead, casting the ancient stone fortress in gloom. A steward greeted them at the gate, leading them through torchlit corridors into a modest great hall. Lord Sunglass was an elderly man, frail and soft-spoken, who expressed surprise at their request. "What records do you seek, my lady?" he inquired, hands trembling slightly on his walking stick. Eleanor kept her tone cordial. "Our commissioners will soon travel the realm to assess old grievances, new opportunities, and we hope to gather historical context from any archives available. Rook's Rest is known for preserving certain records from the conquest era. Might we examine them?" He blinked slowly. "Of course, though I fear our library is in disarray. The tomes haven't been properly catalogued in ages. You're welcome to whatever you can find." She offered thanks. That evening, she and Marek ventured into the bowels of the castle, guided by a timid servant carrying a lantern. They passed through dusty corridors and finally reached a stout door reinforced with iron bands. The servant unlocked it, revealing a chamber reeking of mildew. Shelves lined the walls, laden with scrolls, codices, and crumbling parchments. Cobwebs hung like tattered curtains, and the flicker of lantern light revealed swirling motes of dust. "Charming," Marek muttered, carefully stepping around a collapsed shelf. "Let's start with anything referencing the throne or swords from the conquest." They spent hours combing through stacks, careful to avoid disintegrating fragile pages. Occasionally, they stumbled on genealogical records or accounts of battles. Marek frowned at a particularly old tome with warped leather binding. This mentions something about sacrifices during the forging of the throne. Not new information, though. He flipped through brittle pages with gloved hands. Aha, here. The souls in the swords remain bound to the seat of kings, restless until the rightful blood calls them forth. Typical superstitious language. Eleanor scanned the words. The script told a lurid tale of how the spirits of those who died in Aegon's conquest could be harnessed by a ruler of Targaryen blood. She shuddered, remembering how the throne had seemed to hum with malevolence near Aeron. "Keep it aside," she said. "It might be relevant." Deeper into the library, rummaging through a trunk, she discovered a curious piece of parchment folded between two large volumes. Its edges were singed, the writing nearly illegible in places. She brought it into the light. It appeared to be an account from an unnamed scribe who claimed that the forging of the throne was not the only attempt to trap souls in steel. Another blade was rumored to have been made in secret, a single sword tempered with dark rituals, hidden away lest it surpass even the throne's cursed power. The text named it only as Nightfire. Eleanor's pulse thudded. This matched the warning that there might be another artifact. Nightfire. She inhaled sharply, sharing the document with Marek. He squinted at the faded script. "It's incomplete," he noted. "But the gist is that some of the leftover swords from Aegon's conquest were used to forge this blade. The result was rumored to be dangerously unstable, exuding the same corruption. The scribe says it was sealed away by a council of maesters and warriors who feared its presence. No mention of where." Her thoughts whirled. A single sword, presumably still out there, containing the same malevolent energies that once possessed the Iron Throne. Could that be what these watchers sought? Was it calling to them, or to any Targaryen? She remembered King Aeron's madness, how it had consumed him. She had to prevent any new relic from ensnaring him or anyone else. They gathered the relevant texts, carefully packing them. On returning to the upper floors, Eleanor asked Lord Sunglass if he knew anything about a sword called Nightfire. He shook his head feebly, as if the name caused him unease. "Never heard of it," he whispered. "But we rarely go into those archives. So many old ghost stories." Disheartened but determined, Eleanor thanked him and prepared to depart at first light. She explained to Sir Ellis the gist of their discovery. His eyes narrowed in concern. "Another cursed sword? By the seven, haven't we had enough? Let's hope it's rotted away in some forgotten crypt." Eleanor privately suspected curses didn't simply rot away. She recalled the watchers in black cloaks, the masked intruder in the meltdown, the ominous warnings. All signs pointed to a sinister presence stirring anew. That night, as she tried to sleep in a small guest chamber with a single candle burning low, she worried that even if this Nightfire was a rumor, the rumor alone could drive desperate men to search for it, to claim the same power that once ravaged Aeron. The realm was on a delicate path to recovery. The last thing it needed was another abomination to tear it apart. At dawn, the party left Rook's Rest. Rain threatened from iron-colored clouds overhead. The road was slick, muddy from recent storms, and the wind carried a chill that gnawed at them. They had scarcely traveled an hour when a trio of riders appeared ahead, blocking the path. Men in dark cloaks. Their horses were large, their faces partially hidden by hoods. Eleanor's hand went to the hilt of her belt knife, and Sir Ellis urged his mount forward protectively. One of the cloaked riders spoke in a low, grating voice. "We seek a certain set of documents from Rook's Rest. Hand them over, or prepare to bleed." There was no courtesy, just a cold threat that bristled in the damp air. Eleanor's heart kicked. She'd expected watchers, but not so boldly out in the open. She nudged her horse forward, though Ellis shot her a warning glance. "We carry nothing that concerns you," she said, trying to project authority. "Stand aside." Another of the hooded men barked a harsh laugh. "We know what you found, the name of the sword. Give us the parchment, and we'll let you pass unharmed." Fear and anger mingled in her chest. If these Watchers had intelligence about her mission, they might also know about everything else. She refused to yield. "I will not hand over knowledge that could doom the realm," she said firmly. Sir Ellis drew his sword. "Back away or we'll cut you down." The leader spat. "Then die with your secrets." And with startling swiftness, they spurred their horses forward. Conflict erupted in a splash of mud and steel. Sir Ellis met the first attacker's blade with a ringing clash, deflecting a blow aimed at Eleanor. Another guard engaged the second cloaked figure while the third circled around, attempting to strike from behind. Eleanor's heart pounded. She held her horse steady, scanning for an opening. The Watchers were clearly skilled, their movements coordinated. She could hear the hiss of their swords slicing the rain-chilled air. A swirl of cloak, a flash of steel, and Ellis's horse reared. The first attacker lunged at him again, driving him back. Eleanor's own guard fended off the second Watcher, trading blows that echoed through the drizzle. The third Watcher suddenly surged toward her, sword raised high. She yanked her mare sideways, the blow glancing off her saddle. She felt the shock tremor up her leg. Her only weapon was a belt knife, but with her other hand she seized the reins, trying to maneuver away from his reach. "Hand over the documents," the attacker snarled. "No," she spat, adrenaline surging. She ducked under another slash, heart hammering. A fleeting memory of the meltdown in the throne room lit her mind. This was the same hungry violence, the same lethal desire for dark power. She spotted a glimpse of the man's face under the hood, pale skin, eyes wild with fervor. Where had they come from? Who commanded them? Ellis managed to dispatch one attacker with a savage thrust, forcing the man to topple from his saddle, cloak tangling in the mud. Then Ellis wheeled his horse toward the one menacing Eleanor. Their blades clashed, the ring of steel setting her ears ringing. She took the opportunity to stab out with her belt knife. The Watcher parried in time, but the distraction allowed Ellis a clean strike. His sword bit deep into the Watcher's side. The man let out a strangled cry, sliding off his horse. The last attacker, seeing his companions fallen or incapacitated, reined in with a furious snarl. His hood fell back, revealing a gaunt face and hollow cheeks. An unholy gleam shone in his eyes, which flicked from Ellis to Eleanor, then to the guard who was still able-bodied. "You cannot hide the knowledge from us," he growled, voice trembling with rage. "Nightfire will rise, with or without your cursed king." Before they could close the distance, he spurred his horse into a gallop, disappearing down the muddy road. Rain dripped from Eleanor's cloak, her breath coming in ragged gulps. Two Watchers lay in the mud, one clearly dead, the other gasping. She motioned for the guard to disarm him. Sir Ellis slid off his horse, sword still in hand, and pressed the tip to the wounded Watcher's throat. "Surrender," he said through gritted teeth. The man glared at him, blood staining his cloak. "You think you've won? The artifact is out there. The Watchers will find it. It calls to us." His voice was thick with delirium or conviction or both. Eleanor dismounted carefully, stepping over to him. She could see the life draining from his eyes. "Who leads you?" she demanded. "Where's Nightfire?" A twisted smile parted his lips. "We follow the true heir of the swords. We serve the will of the steel. The dragon line will bow again or burn." Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. He drew in a wet breath. Then, with effort, he lifted a small vial from within his cloak, biting off the stopper with a gruesome rasp. Before Ellis could strike, the Watcher downed the contents. His body convulsed, eyes rolling back, foam on his lips. The knight grabbed for him, but it was too late. The man's body went limp in the puddle, dark fluid trickling from his mouth. A horrified hush fell. Ellis wiped rain from his face, breathing hard. Poison. He killed himself rather than be taken. Eleanor stared, shock and revulsion twisting her stomach. These men were beyond reason, fanatics bound to some malignant cause. Nightfire. A sword that might carry the same curse as the Iron Throne. They believed it was calling to them. She gazed at the road where the last rider vanished. He would spread the warning to whatever group or cult commanded them. And next time, they might come in greater numbers. "Gather the body," she told Ellis, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to search him for clues, then give him a burial. Burn the corpse if we must. I won't have this vile business cursing the land." The knight nodded, face grim. "And the documents?" "We keep them safe," Eleanor said fiercely, pressing a hand to the satchel slung over her shoulder. "If they want these pages so badly, it means they're afraid we'll learn how to stop them." Together, they pulled themselves together and continued the ride to King's Landing. The Watchers' attack confirmed the worst, malevolent forces truly did seek to re-establish the curse that once infested the monarchy. Eleanor felt dread coil in her gut, but also a renewed sense of purpose. The realm would not be thrown back into tyranny or haunted by cursed steel, not if she could help it. Up. On reaching the Red Keep at nightfall, she and Ellis went straight to Caraway, recounting the ambush. The older lord's face darkened with concern, but also a flicker of resolution. So it's true, he murmured. A cult of watchers, seeking to claim another cursed blade. We must inform the king now. He needs to understand the threat. Eleanor nodded. We can't keep him in the dark anymore. This is bigger than rumors. They attacked us on the road. They're organized. Caraway rubbed his temples. Then we must root them out swiftly. Formally. The realm can't afford a shadow war. But let's break it to Aaron carefully, so he doesn't spiral into despair. That evening, the three of them gathered in the king's study. Aaron listened, pale and silent, as Eleanor revealed the existence of Nightfire, the Watcher's ambush, and their unwavering belief that the blade called to them. She expected him to recoil in terror, but instead, his gaze turned steely. His hands clenched into fists on the table. So they want to subject the realm to another monstrous artifact, he said hoarsely. I won't allow it. He looked to Eleanor, eyes flickering with the remnants of the old guilt, but also a spark of new determination. Tell me what we must do. She swallowed hard. We track them, we identify their leaders, we uncover the location of Nightfire, if it even still exists, and we destroy it. We can't let it corrupt another soul. But to do so, we'll need resources, manpower. We must be prepared for infiltration. They might have allies in the city. Aaron nodded. Consider it done. I'll call upon the council tomorrow. We'll form a royal investigation. And if that cursed sword appears in our realm, we'll melt it to slag, just as we did the throne. Relief and trepidation warred in Eleanor's chest. She remembered the meltdown, the roaring wildfire, the near collapse of the throne room. Would it come to that again? She prayed there was a simpler way. Yet, seeing the king stand firm, refusing to be cowed by this new threat, bolstered her resolve. Together, they had banished one curse from the realm. Perhaps, if their hearts remained steadfast, they could banish another. That night, she lay awake, listening to the distant hush of the Blackwater rush and the quiet footfalls of guards patrolling the corridors. A storm was brewing, one not of weather, but of secret loyalties, ancient powers, and the unending hunger for dominion that plagued mortal hearts. It might be that the Watchers in black cloaks were only the first wave of an even greater conflict. The realm had tasted freedom, had begun to heal from tyranny, and now a new shadow threatened to swallow the fragile light. She thought of her mother's cautionary tales, of the vow she had made to protect the innocent. She thought of Dorne's cautious acceptance, of the peasants' longing for stable harvests, of the knights and ladies who risked their lives to support this new monarchy. The realm's burdens weighed heavy, but her resolve was heavier still. She would not allow another cursed blade to enthrall a king, nor let fanatics enthrone darkness in the heart of the Seven Kingdoms. Though the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, she would walk it with unyielding purpose. Outside her window, the moon broke through a ragged cloud, casting silver light across the rooftops of King's Landing. Below, in the winding streets, countless lives went on, unaware of the ominous puzzle pieces falling into place. Yet the light shone steadfast, cutting through the gloom. Eleanor took that as an omen. Darkness might be strong, but a single flame of resolve, fueled by hope and courage, could drive it back. For the sake of the realm, she would kindle that flame, keep it alive, even if it meant confronting every vile secret left in the wake of the Iron Throne's destruction.